Well, good afternoon, everybody. We're going to be talking about voice, and I have one. We've all got. I mean, we mostly all have one, but it's really interesting what we've been doing with voice very recently. We have seen quite the leap in terms of voice technology over the last few years. I'm sure the older people in the room will remember the Star Trek film where they pick up the mouse and go, "Computer, computer." But now we are literally talking to our devices all the time, whether it be Echoes or Google Homes, whether it be our smartphones through Siri, Google Assistant, Samsung's tech, etc., etc. And we're talking to our devices all the time. But we're missing out a big part of the story, I think. Before we get into talking about security in voice, let's talk about where voice is right now, what the state of it is, and where you think it's going. Tell me more, Vijay.
So, you're absolutely right? Voice has come a long way. And for the longest time, I remember when I used to have these voice assistants in your car, and I'd say, call home, and it would say routing to Rome, right? Because I was in Atlanta, Georgia, and it would route me to Rome, Georgia. So it was really, really horrible. And so, one of the things is that there's three big things that have changed in voice technology. One is what's known as speech recognition, which is the words that you say, right? When you say hello world, the fact that you're saying hello world with as thick an accent, I have a thick Indian accent, so as thick an accent, being able to recognize that. And for the longest time, the accuracy of those systems was at 70%, or, they had 30% word error rates. That is, if you said 3 sentences, so 20 words, the actual speech system would recognize 2 of those 3 sentences, about 13 words, which means it had no clue what you were talking about. And then in 2012 to 2016, you had Microsoft, Google, Amazon all improve the state of speech recognition so much that we're right now at 95% word or 5% word error rates, which fundamentally means out of 20 words, you're able to understand 19 out of those 20 words. And when you're able to understand 19 out of the 20 words, you can actually guess the 20th word. And so speech recognition has come a long way. The second big thing that's come a long way is what's known as natural language processing, which is when you say recognize speech, are you saying recognize speech, or are you asking to wreck a nice beach? Right? So it's that play on words, and it's the fact that English has so many different variants, tones. So how do you understand the intent, not just the content of what someone is saying, but the intent of what they're saying? And there, we're not there yet, right? So we're at what's known as domain-specific NLP. That is, if you want to book an appointment, a virtual assistant can get you to book an appointment. But if you want to have a free-flowing conversation, you want to talk about meditation, you won't be able to do that, right? And then the final thing is what's known as text-to-speech, which is how does that assistant speak back to you? And if you remember, for the longest time, a lot of these assistants sounded very robotic, extremely robotic. You knew you were talking to a machine. And now, if you look at Google Duplex and a lot of these newer systems, they actually sound very much like a human. And so that also, we've come a long way. So these 3 technologies have all progressed to get to a state where we're actually perfectly comfortable talking to these assistants, and people like my niece actually treat it with a lot of respect. So she talks to her Alexa and says please and thank you after a query, which is very, very interesting.
That is really good. For the record, I only actually understand 5 out of 20 words usually.
So that means my accent is a little worse than I thought.
No, or my grasp of the English language isn't as good as you think. When we talk to these devices, there's a big difference now between what people will do in a public environment versus a private environment. Obviously, Amazon Echo and Google Home in people's houses and in their hotel rooms. It's perfectly reasonable for anyone to ask any question of those devices because they're in a private space. Right. But one of the issues that I've seen is that when you take conversational UI and voice recognition out into public spaces, people frankly don't want to be calling out their credit card number in a public space. Right. People don't want to be asking, hey Google, what are the results of my clinic tests, right. In a public space. So there's a very big difference between the 2 of those. What do you think realistically the uses of voice technology in public spaces are going to be, and which ones are people just never going to want to do?
Yeah, so it's funny, right, that we all believe that in public spaces, not many people are going to use voice assistant technology. But it's funny, I was in a crowded mall and I saw this mom carrying these two kids, and she was holding both those kids with two hands, and then she pressed her Google little pod button, and she started speaking right in the middle of, it's like when Bluetooth came out, right? We looked at all of these people and said, are they speaking to me or are they mad, right? And so, it's one of those things that you're absolutely right. I would never check my medical results, or I would never phone up my credit card company right out in the public. And so there are going to be a lot of situations. I'm in the airport, I'm in the middle of walking into the aisle. In many of those situations, I'm not going to use voice. So it's not like voice is going to take over every single interface, every single interaction. What it's going to do is, in a lot of settings where you have these very powerful directional mics that can take only your input, and you're not disturbing too many other people, you're going to have voice take over, largely because voice allows you to speak at the speed of thought, right? That's the closest to the speed of thought. When I type or when I use other interfaces, there's two things, right? One, because I'm Indian, I speak really, really quickly. I can get 4 times as much conveyed speaking rather than typing. And then the second thing is, voice also lends itself to the way we think. We think randomly. I don't say, okay, I want to start off, I want to go to accounts overview, then I'm going to go through the menu item, then I'm going to check wire transfer, and then I'm going to do wire transfer from one place to another, and I'm going to do it one time, right? That's a very learned behavior where we've learned to do things sequentially. We just want to do things randomly, and voice lends itself to speed and randomness in a very, very elegant way. So I think you're going to see 60 to 70% of interactions that you typically have with a compute device start getting dominated by voice, but there's going to be at least 30 to 40% of the times that you couldn't care less about voice.
So then the issue, and the one we want to discuss today, is then security, because obviously, if we're able to control a device with our voice, then anybody is able to control our device with their voice.
Yeah.
Like, you have voice imprints on smartphones, but my friends can use my smartphone and say something to it. It will still follow the instructions.
Yeah.
I routinely control my friends' Google Homes, and do all sorts of nefarious things with them. But that's fun. So that's cool, but then you have like hacking, and hacking, the best hacking in the world is not the sort of thing where we're doing brute force attacks using computers. It's where people phone up T-Mobile and pretend to be you.
Right.
And it's social engineering, and getting your details, taking control of your phone, cloning it, shutting it down, trying to get your crypto or whatever they're trying to do.
Right.
That is where voice needs to be managed, and there's a lot of security issues there. What can we do about that? What are some of the things that you're doing at Pindrop about security and voice in those aspects?
No, absolutely, and I'll actually punctuate this with a lot of data, because we analyze about 1.1 billion voice interactions every single year. So we see what's happening out there in the world, and it's really, really interesting, right? Like you said, there are 2 places where voice is used, right? When you call up your bank, your insurance, your retailer, what they do right now is ask you questions, right? That's the level of security. What's your mother's maiden name? What's your date of birth? How many of you have been asked these questions? What's your mother's maiden name, date of birth? Yeah. So all of you have been asked the questions. These fraudsters, these attackers are really good. They know the answers to many of your questions. And more importantly, they're very clever. One of my favorite calls is this fraudster calls in, and the call center agent says, what's your mother's maiden name? And his answer is, my dad married thrice, so can I take 3 guesses? That doesn't even make sense, right? So what if your dad married thrice? You still have 1 mother. The funny thing is that the call center agent allows him to take 3 guesses. He guesses the top 3 mothers' maiden names in the US. His last one is Smith. He's right. And he wires $97,000 to a bank in England, right? So that's your money, right? And so it's as easy, right? It's like stealing candy from a baby. And so these guys are really, really good. And you have these fraudsters who not only use the answers to these questions, they actually use a whole bunch of voice technologies to start beating these systems. So, we at Pindrop, because we do this, every fraudster that we catch gets a conference room name at Pindrop. So all our conference rooms are named after fraudsters we've got. So we have this conference room called Chipmunk. And Chipmunk is this guy who goes after women's accounts. He's a male fraudster sitting in Nigeria, every day dialing for dollars. And whenever he comes across a woman's account, he now needs to sound like a woman. So he uses this distortion technology called Screaming Bee and starts increasing the frequency of his voice. And occasionally he makes a mistake and he sounds like Alvin the Chipmunk, right? And so that's why he's called Chipmunk. And so a lot of these attackers have these very, very motivated ways of attacking these organizations. And that's where, what we do is we say, rather than use questions and passwords and pins, a lot of these IoT devices like your smart home locks use spoken 4-digit pins, right, as security. That's like the combination of the worst set of security ideas, right? A pin is a bad idea, a 4-digit pin is even worse, and a spoken 4-digit pin is probably the worst, right? You're sitting in front of your door saying 1, 2, 3, 4 for everyone else to hear, and it's letting you in. And your kids are doing the same, telling their friends. And so, if you thought putting that key under your doormat was a bad idea, this is even worse than that, right? And so it's like giving everyone in the neighborhood a key to your house. And so what we do is we say, you have to get away from these antiquated forms of security that depend on pins, passwords, questions, which are something you know, which is something everyone else knows in this day and age of data breaches. Instead, what we say is, your voice actually has very unique characteristics. So we actually identify your voice by its unique characteristics. We then identify your device by sound characteristics that your device emanates. And then you have a certain behavior when you're trying to do things with these devices. So for example, when the bank asks you to press your social security number, you have a certain pattern with which you press it. And that's very different than a bad guy who's looking at a piece of paper and entering those digits. So we replace the something you know with who you are by your voice, what you have by your device, and what you do based on your behavior. But ultimately, you need some kind of multi-factor authentication system that prevents the guy calling Verizon or T-Mobile and hacking into your account.
I mean, that's great, but we also live in a world where we have deepfake technology, where we can produce videos of Barack Obama saying things he's never actually said.
Yeah.
Adobe have technology that allows you to write out entire transcripts and have them, unfortunately this exists, have them spoken, which is going to put me out of a job for my voiceover work eventually, which I'm very upset about. And these deepfake technologies are remarkably good.
Yep.
How are you going to help people protect against those situations? Because the hackers, have all of the access to the same tools that we have.
Yeah.
Everyone's getting excited about quantum computing because of the incredible, cryptography that you can do with such devices. But the hackers are going to have quantum computers as well.
Yeah.
That combined with deep faking, audio faking, how are we going to stop the hackers?
So deepfake is a great example, right? We at Pindrop also have our own voice synthesis tool, and it's a great party trick, right? We have everyone's voice is Ariana Huffington, President Trump, President Obama, and you can say any phrase you like, and if anyone is interested, I actually have my laptop here. I can actually play you any of those guys on demand, right? It's one of those things that is a really scary proposition. But the good news is, at least the state of deepfakes that exist right now, even though the name deepfake sounds really ominous and scary, you can actually detect most of them, right? So we can detect most audio fakes with extremely high accuracy. And the reason is you have human evolution on your side, and the way audio or video is captured is extremely high fidelity. So if you think about a single second of you speaking, the way your audio is captured is 8,000 samples. So every second of your speech has 8,000 samples written onto whatever, disk and things like that. And so you can look at that, and you can look at what is the physical human anatomy that produced this voice. And when you start looking at it at that granular detail, you run into all of these crazy errors, right? So for example, when we looked at Lyrebird and Adobe Voco, which were the two examples you mentioned, we created all of these voices, and then you see that, so for example, when someone says, "Hello, Paul," their mouth is wide open when they say hello, and then their mouth goes down when they say Paul. There's only a certain speed, because you're human, by which you can do that, and there's only a certain configuration of the back of your throat, the front of your mouth, your entire oral and nasal cavity that can exist as you're doing that. And by looking at that, for example, when we looked at Adobe Voco, we said, okay, the only person that could generate the speech is Giraffe Man, because he would have had to have a 7-foot long neck, and he'd have to go back and forth among those configurations, and therefore, you can detect things like that. Even a system like Google Duplex, it does a particular portion of speech production in very bad ways, called fricatives. When you're saying, like friction, when your mouth is very, very constricted, it says that in bad ways. And if you look at the Department of Defense, they came out with these deepfake detection tools. And the solution is actually very simple for all the deepfake videos that exist right now. It is those deepfake videos don't blink, right? So a lot of these deepfakes are machines that are looking at all of these video samples and then creating a video of Nicolas Cage on top of every movie, right? But the point is they're getting all of this from still images where the chance of you blinking is less, or they pick the ones that don't have you blinking because that gives them more information, the color of your eye and things like that. And so when these machines generate these deep fake videos, you find that Nicolas Cage never blinks in them. And so immediately you can create basic forensic algorithms that look at what humans do over time and use that. But like you said, it's an arms race, right? It's something that you have to keep. I mean, the attackers are getting together and sharing all of this information with themselves in the dark web. We've seen that, right? We've seen them talking about each of these tools and things like that. So as good people, we need to combine together and start doing things to detect these deep fakes. That's the only way.
I don't know why, but I feel compelled to give an interesting fact right now, which is that giraffes and humans have the same amount of bones in their necks. Did you know that?
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That is interesting. So we clearly can't use that.
Yeah, it's completely random. So what happens when somebody is ill? Because obviously when you're ill, it changes your voice dramatically, or when you've been punched in the throat because you mentioned giraffes and bones on stage. But what happens when that sort of thing occurs? Because it really does modify your voice dramatically. And how would you still identify that that is the right person?
Yeah. So what happens is, voice recognition is not a binary answer, right? It is your voice or it's not. It's a level of probabilities that it's your voice. And so when you're sick and when you have a cough or a cold, that probability goes down. It doesn't go down to 0, it goes down. And that's where, you can't replace questions or passwords or pins that's one factor with another factor. If you just replace one factor with another factor of voice, you're trading off one set of ills for another set of ills. So anyone who tells you, hey, we're going to replace all of this with another single factor, that's a bad idea. That's where you have to use multiple factors. So your voice might not be great, but I can identify your device, and so on and so forth. So you can do that. In fact, there are other things, right? So we age over time. And your voice ages with you. And it ages, it's funny, it ages every 4 months. So there's this very, very nice study in one of these big security conferences that showed that any voice recognition system, Barack Obama, during his 8-year presidency, if they tried to, enroll his voice in the first year, by year number 2, it would stop recognizing him because he had so much stress in the job, his voice changed drastically as he aged, just like his face changed. And so you have to compensate for things like, colds, coughs, but even very natural human phenomenon like aging.
So we have a catch box over there. If you have a question, we'd love to throw the catch box at you. We will try not to throw it into your throat and change your voice. So if you put your hand up, if you have a question for Vijay. I can't see anybody. Anyone? Oh, there's one there. Can we throw the catch box all the way up there, please?
Okay, hey. What do you see as people's awareness over time that these sort of profiles are being built about their voices? That's it.
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, it's an important thing. Being able to do these voice profiles, one, with complete user consent. That is, you completely know where your voice is being used, where it's being profiled, and where it's allowing you access to, services that you previously didn't have access to. That's absolutely something that's important. But the other side of it is also, are the systems that are profiling your voice doing so in a very privacy-preserving manner? Because, we talk about data breaches all day. Now with all of this voice becoming so important, you're going to go into this world of audio breaches where people are trying to harvest your voice so that they can get a machine to start sounding like you. And all we need is about 2 minutes of you speaking, and I can get a machine to sound exactly like you.
We got one more question and time for one more question. With the catch box there.
So you guys talked briefly on deepfakes, and you guys mentioned that you don't think the technology is ready yet, but sort of feel like eventually it'll hit that point. So I'm wondering, for the strategy around these new AI attacks, is your strategy more preventive or more reactive, and how are you thinking about that?
Another great question. It's actually more preventive. So, even though there are a lot of these deep fakes, you have a lot of challenges, like MIT and folks like that run a bunch of challenges. One of the most popular ones is what's known as ASV spoof, right? Because these are academic challenges, they don't have great names. It's ASV spoof stands for Automatic Speaker Verification Spoofing Challenge. And the cool news is in 2019, Google has decided to give hundreds of hours of its synthetic speech systems as part of the challenge. And you need more of that, right? So that you're not in reactive mode. You have the best and brightest of the world creating synthetic speech, putting them through these things and getting the best and brightest to run their algorithms to see if they can detect it. So that you already have algorithms ready to catch these deep fakes when they actually occur in the wild. And so it's important for that. I mean, I think there's a bunch of laws also that are getting written about these things, but I don't think laws are very effective to stop the motivated attacker from completely ruining a country's elections.
Wonderful. This has been fascinating conversation about voice. I have never talked about voice and security before. It's been really enlightening, and I hope everybody's learned something about giraffes and bones.
I think
we're 2 over, so.
that's okay.
You sure?
We can have one more question.
Well, we can have one more question. All right, we got time for one more question. There's a man right there. Good catch, sir.
Nice. Hi, guys. First of all, thanks for the conversation. That was pretty cool. So, what do you think in terms of the voice technologies being really pushed onto the consumer market as, I would say, more like a marketing agenda rather than a real application? Because to me, it's overblown. I mean, there are certain aspects where you can definitely use a lot of value out of the voice technologies, but then there are certain use cases where it's just completely out of place.
So I think, the good news is marketing agendas seldom win, right? The consumer always speaks. So you can do as much pushing as possible, but if the technology doesn't have a killer reason to be there, it'll get rejected, right? In the grand scheme of things, it'll get rejected. So, like most people who want voice to win, there are biases. And so you're going to try everything to make it succeed, but at the end of the day, the consumer will speak. If it is convenient, I find voice amazingly convenient because, if I had to book, tomorrow is Valentine's Day, right? I can go tell my Google Home, hey, I want to book a dinner restaurant for Valentine's Day. It knows where I live. It knows Feb 14th is Valentine's Day. And it knows great romantic restaurants because it has access to Yelp, my Yelp account. And so it's able to do all of that without me having to go to 3 different apps and do it. So I like it for the convenience, but you might reject it because it just feels kitschy, right? And so I think the consumer at the end of the day will speak.
Yeah, and I'd add to that when you think about how we use personalized marketing, we can already build personas of our consumer groups based on location data and working out where they go and what shops they go to. And we can build personas. We know the difference between a coffee lover and a single mother. We can use voice to do a similar thing. We can actually segment by voice types. And we can then start advertising to you based on those segmentations. The key is that consumers will always reject it if they don't see the value in giving up that data. So as marketers, the onus is on you to segment your data, but always offer more value than the data that's being given. You have to offer more value than what is being offered by the consumer to you in order to give that personalization. So the simple answer is just don't be creepy with it, and then it's okay. I think that's our time. Yes, I've got thumbs up. So please, please, please show your appreciation to Vijay. Thank you.
Thank you.